Wyoming Territory, late December 1881, 40 miles east of Buffalo. The snow had come down hard overnight, dry and bitter, blowing like ash across the high plains. The wind had a cruel voice in it, like the land itself was angry to still be alive. Cold bit through layers of wool and denim, through skin and into bone, and it showed no mercy. Caleb Rourke rode with his head low and his collar up, his breath clouding like smoke in the air. His horse, a rangy sorrel with more heart than muscle, pushed forward through the drifts without complaint. Caleb's gloves were stiff with ice. His left boot had cracked down the heel. He'd wrapped it in old canvas, but it was wet through now. He couldn't feel his toes. There was no real reason to be out riding that morning. No cows lost, no fence down. Just something in him that couldn't sit still. The cabin felt tighter than usual, though he lived alone. He dreamt again last night of voices behind a closed door, of a child's laughter he could not reach. So he rode. The land stretched flat and wide, white to the ends of sight. Wind cut through sagebrush and rattled the bare cottonwoods like bones. It was a landscape shaped by survival, where only the hard things lasted. It was just past midday when he saw it, something off the trail near the bend in the creek that hadn't yet frozen solid. A shape too small and crooked for an elk or mule deer. It didn't move. He pulled the sorrel to a halt. Sat there staring. A coat, torn and half buried in snow, a bundle beside it. He swung down and stumbled the last yards on foot, knees buckling from cold and shock. It was a woman, young maybe, her skin gray with cold lips, cracked and bleeding. One arm curled tight around a boy, maybe 5 years old. Another 2 children smaller lay against her under the coat, silent as snow. He dropped to his knees. "Ma'am," he said, his voice hoarse, "can you hear me?" Her eyes twitched, not quite open, but not gone either. The boy stirred faintly, as if in a daze. His face was red and raw, eyes rimmed with ice. "Jesus," Caleb whispered. He tugged off his coat and wrapped it around the smallest child. Then he stood, turned, and ran for the horse. It took 3 trips. First the boy, then the smallest girl. Last, the woman. Caleb half dragged, half carried her to the saddle, then swung up behind, clutching her upright with one arm. She weighed almost nothing. He didn't think, just rode. The wind lashed at them. The snow came sideways. His horse stumbled once, but found its feet. The cabin came up out of the whiteness like a ghost, dark logs and a low roof with smoke barely rising. Caleb didn't pray often, didn't believe much in what passed for mercy in the world, but he murmured something now. A plea to something God, fire time not to take them yet. Inside, the warmth hit like a blow. He'd left the fire burning low when he left that morning. He threw in more wood, then more. Stripped off the wet coats. The kids were barely moving, but their eyes were open. He wrapped them in blankets, set a pot of water to boil. She was freezing through her fingers, blue belly swollen beneath the wool like a full moon. He stared at that belly, then back to her face. "Ma'am," he said again, quieter. "You got to stay with me now." He didn't know her name. Didn't know how long she'd been out there. Didn't know why a pregnant woman with 3 children was out walking into death. But she'd looked at him just before she fell unconscious. Just a flick of the eyes. And in that glance was something he could not walk away from. Caleb sat beside the bed the rest of the night, wiping her face with snow to wake her when her breath grew shallow. The children slept against the hearth. He gave them the last of the flour in a thin paste and whispered nonsense words to keep them from crying. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, time slowed to a heartbeat. One thump at a time. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving a silence so deep it rang in Caleb's ears. He hadn't slept. His hands were raw from tending the fire, checking pulses, moving blankets. The woman still hadn't stirred. Her breath came in slow, shallow pulls. Her skin had warmed some, but not enough. The children were awake now, watching him. The oldest boy didn't say a word, just clung to his sister. She coughed once, a sharp, dry sound. The littlest girl whimpered now and then, eyes blank as marbles. Caleb didn't know what to do with them. He poured weak coffee into a tin cup and offered it to the boy. "What's your name?" The boy didn't answer. "I ain't gonna hurt you. You hear me?" He tried to soften his voice, though it came out cracked. "You got a name?" The boy looked at the floor. After a while he muttered, "Eli." "That your mama?" A pause. Then a small nod. Caleb looked over at the woman. Her lips were still cracked. Her hands trembled even in sleep. He stepped outside to clear his head and piss. The world had turned to crystal. Snow glittered in the trees. The wind was gone, leaving only the sound of branches cracking under weight. The cold was still sharp, but without the wind it felt bearable. He stared out across the frozen plain and thought of leaving. Not forever, just a day. Ride to the Petersons' place 15 miles west. They'd have food, maybe a doctor could be fetched from town. But he couldn't leave them alone. Not with her in this shape. Not with 3 children who barely spoke. Back inside he fed the fire again. The cabin was small, barely 2 rooms. A bed, a table, and shelves crowded with canned goods, most of them empty now. He hadn't stocked properly before the snow came. He hadn't thought he'd need to. He found the last slab of salt pork and boiled it with potatoes. It wasn't much, but the smell seemed to wake something in the woman. She groaned and shifted her hand to her belly. Caleb knelt beside her. "You're all right," he said. "You're safe now." Her eyes fluttered, then opened halfway. They were dark, almost black. She blinked at him, confused. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. "You need water," he said, lifting a tin cup to her mouth. She sipped, coughed, then lay still again. "What's your name?" he asked. She tried again, voice no more than a whisper. "Mara. You're in my cabin. Found you down near the creek. You got 3 little ones. They're fine. You hear me?" She blinked once, then again. Her eyes shifted toward the hearth where the children huddled still, watching. A tear slid down her cheek. Caleb stood and walked to the window, needing to look at something other than her face. Her pain was too plain, too much like his own. The sun was rising, slow and pale. The snow caught the light like glass. The world looked clean, but he knew better. He looked back at Mara. She was asleep again. The boy Eli watched him without blinking. "You their pa?" the boy asked suddenly. "No," Caleb said. "Just the man who found her." The boy didn't speak again, just nodded once, as if that was answer enough. Caleb set to work without thinking. He fetched water, mended the broken window shutter, chopped wood until his shoulders ached. He needed motion, needed something to keep from thinking too hard, because the truth was he didn't want anyone in this cabin. Hadn't for years. He'd built this place after losing too much, after the land took what little he had left and still asked for more. A wife buried in childbirth. A brother gunned down over cattle. No parents to speak of, just dirt and wind and loss. But now there was a woman in his bed, children by the fire, a boy asking questions with his eyes, and something in him stirred. Something old and worn, like a well-used bridle pulled from a dusty wall. He didn't like it, but he didn't push it away either. The woman Mara was breathing easier by nightfall. She ate a few spoonfuls of broth without choking. Her voice came clearer in short bursts. She looked at him across the room. "Thank you," she said. Caleb just nodded. He didn't have the words for what he felt. Not yet. Stay with us as the frontier reveals what it demands and what it gives back. By the third day, the children had begun to explore, quiet at first, sticking to the corners of the room like shadows. But by midday, Ely found the tin of buttons on the shelf and spread them across the floor, arranging them by color. The middle child, Lina, as Mara had managed to whisper, sat beside him, copying his movements. The littlest girl toddled between the hearth and the cot, dragging a worn scrap of cloth behind her like a tail. Mara watched them with hollow eyes. She was stronger now, but still pale. Her voice came slow and careful, like it cost her something to speak. When she tried to sit up, pain bent her over. The child in her belly shifted visibly and she winced. "Not long now," she murmured. Caleb nodded from the table. "You got a midwife?" She gave a tired shake of the head. "Not anymore." He didn't ask what that meant. The answer was plain in her face. Outside, the snow had crusted into a brittle shell. The days were clear but bitter. He'd have to ride out soon into town or to a neighbor's place. They needed food, cloth, oil, but the idea of leaving her here didn't sit right, and the thought of bringing them with him seemed near impossible. He poured her more broth, sat it beside her. "Where were you headed?" She looked toward the window as if she might see something familiar out there. "Nowhere. Whoa. Just away." "From who?" A long pause. Then a man. "Your man?" "No, not anymore." There was steel in the way she said it. Not defiant, but final. She wasn't scared, not in that moment. Just done. Caleb leaned back, rubbing at the stubble on his jaw. "You walk all this way?" "Wagon broke. South of here. 3 days ago, I think." She touched her head like she was trying to hold something in place. "We had a little food left. Not much. I didn't know how far we'd get. Just had to try." The silence in the room swelled. He thought of the road she must have taken, how far she'd come through wind and snow. 3 children in tow. Pregnant. Lost. "Why not go west?" he asked. "Sheridan's closer." "Because he'd look for me there." The way she said it told Caleb all he needed to know. He didn't ask another question. That night, after the children were asleep and Mara dozed by the fire, he sat with his back to the door, cleaning his rifle. Not because he thought someone was coming, just in case. He tried not to think about the way the littlest girl had curled against his leg earlier, too tired to sit up, or how Eli had taken to helping him split kindling without being asked. The boy swung the hatchet like he meant it. Not for play. Mara stirred around midnight. Caleb turned to find her sitting upright, sweating despite the cold. Her hand clutched her side. "Something's wrong," she said. "I feel it." He knelt beside her, unsure. "Like the baby's coming." She shook her head. "No, it's something else. Like my body's tearing." He pressed his hand to her forehead. She was burning up. Fever, sudden and sharp. His stomach turned. He'd seen infection before. Watched it take strong men down in a day. She gripped his arm. "Don't let me die here." "You're not gonna die," he said too fast. "You don't know that." "I ain't letting it happen." She closed her eyes, teeth clenched. "They won't survive without me. Those babies." Her voice cracked and she drew a shaking breath. Caleb stood fast and began throwing on his coat. "I'll ride to the Petersons. They've got a wagon. Might know a doctor." She caught his sleeve. "It's too far." "It's not," he said more firmly than he felt. "It's not if I don't stop." She let him go. He looked once at the sleeping children, then back to her. "You hold on," he said. "You fight. I'll be back by night." Then he stepped into the dark. The sky was black and blistered with stars. The cold hit him like a wall. He mounted up and rode hard west hooves, punching through the frozen crust with each stride. He didn't let himself think of what might happen if he was too late. He just rode. The Peterson place came into view just after midday, smoke rising from the chimney and horses standing hitched in the lean to their backs, frosted white. Caleb was half frozen and near blind with windburn. He slid from the saddle, stiff as wood, and knocked on the door with the side of his fist. Thomas Peterson answered, rifle in hand. His expression softened when he saw Caleb. "Lord, you look like death." "Got a woman at my place," Caleb asked. "Pregnant. Fever. She ain't mine. Found her near froze with 3 kids." Thomas blinked once, then stepped aside. "Come in before you fall down." Inside smelled of meat and fire. The Petersons had plenty 5 boys, a dog, and more warmth than Caleb felt in years. Mary Peterson moved fast, wrapping a blanket around him, asking questions before he could answer. "Don't know her last name," he muttered. "Mara. She needs a midwife. Maybe a doctor." Mary didn't pause. "We'll take the wagon. I'll ride with you. You can't bring her here in this cold. She's too weak to move anyway." Mary turned to Thomas. "Get the wagon hitched. Tell Will to pack blankets. We'll need broth and vinegar. Caleb, you sit. You're no good to her if you collapse." He didn't argue. They left within the hour. Mary bundled beside him on the buckboard, directing Thomas's eldest down the rutted path toward Caleb's place. The wind had died, but the snow was deep, and the wagon rocked with each jolt. Caleb kept his eyes ahead. They reached the cabin by dusk. Inside, the fire was low and the air heavy. Mara lay soaked in sweat, lips dry, eyes barely open. The children sat huddled, quiet and frightened. When they saw Caleb, the youngest girl began to cry. Mary dropped her coat and knelt beside the bed. "Help me get this dress off her," she said. "We need heat, more water. Bring every blanket you've got." Caleb obeyed. He moved without thought, building the fire higher, bringing water from the snowmelt bucket, laying hot bricks beneath the covers. Mary worked quickly, her hands steady as stone. She spoke softly to Mara, wiping her brow, coaxing sips of water between her lips. "She's strong," Mary said, "but she's fighting an infection. Could have been the cold or something from before. Her body's overtaxed." She said something felt like it was tearing. Mary nodded grimly. "Could be placental. Could be anything. We won't know till the baby comes." Caleb looked at Mara's face. Her eyes fluttered, searching the air. Then she whispered, "The kids. They're all right," he said. "They're warm. Fed. You rest now." Her hand reached out, groping for something. He took it. She squeezed. Mary gave him a long look. "Not unkind, just knowing. You care about her." He didn't answer. Didn't need to. The children fell asleep again in the corner, curled together like pups. Caleb sat by the fire while Mary worked through the night, cooling Mara's fever and whispering prayers under her breath. At some point, Caleb must have dozed off, head tipped against the wall. He woke to a sound, Mara gasping, calling out, and found the room full of light. "Morning." Mary bent low over her, speaking fast now. "It's time," she said without looking up. "This baby's coming, and it's coming fast." Caleb stood useless. "Boil more water. Get ready to hold her shoulders down if she thrashes. We might not have long." The next hour was a blur of breath and blood and screaming. Mara's strength came in surges, as if drawn from some deep place below pain. She fought like a cornered animal, cried out for no one, bit her lip until it bled. Then suddenly silence. A wail. Mary lifted the child high, red and wriggling. "It's a girl," she said, voice thick. Mara turned her head, eyes glazed, and reached. Caleb took the baby from Mary, wrapped her in the cleanest towel they had, and laid her gently in Mara's arms. Her fingers trembled as she held the infant close. Tears slid down her cheeks, wordless and slow. "You did it," Caleb said, crouching beside her. Mara looked at him. Not through him this time. At him. She whispered, "Thank you." Caleb took her hand again, and this time he didn't let go. Snow melted slow that week, leaving behind a dull gray crust across the plains. The sun returned in fits, spilling light through the windows of the cabin, catching on the curls of smoke from the chimney. The wind eased. Birds came back timid and quiet, as if unsure whether the cold had truly passed. Inside, time bent in strange ways. Mara healed in inches. The fever broke 2 nights after the birth, though her strength came back slower than anyone liked. Mary stayed 3 more days, then left them with bundles of cloth jars of broth and strict instructions. Caleb saw her off with his horse hitched behind the wagon. He'd walk back. When he stepped inside again, the cabin felt different. The baby, whom Mara called June, slept in a wooden crate lined with wool. Her tiny fists always clenched, her face full of frowns and sighs. Lena helped feed her, her little hands learning gentleness. Eli took to hauling water without being asked, and even the youngest, Ruthie, had stopped crying at night. There was still a quiet grief in all of them, but it had settled. Like the wind after a storm, Caleb noticed how Mara's eyes followed her children. With worry, yes, but also awe. Like she couldn't quite believe they'd made it. One evening he found her standing at the window, leaning on the back of a chair for balance. The sun was going down behind the ridge, and gold lit the edges of her face. "You ought to be resting," he said, not unkindly. "I needed to see sky," she murmured. "Didn't realize how much I missed it." He came and stood beside her, close but not touching. The silence between them was easier now. "How long were you with him?" Caleb asked after a moment. She didn't answer right away. 6 years. Since I was 17. He wasn't bad at first. Just angry. Didn't know how to be anything else. He said nothing, just waited. "I thought I could fix it," she went on. "Kept thinking it was me. That if I just stayed kind, if I just got quieter, he'd stop breaking things." Caleb looked at her then, but she was still watching the sky. "I had June in me when he threw Eli into the barn wall for dropping a pan." Her voice cracked. "I didn't pack much. Just food and blankets. Got the wagon before he came back from town. Rode till the wheels split." Caleb felt something hard settle in his gut. Not surprise, but rage all the same. Quiet rage like ice. He kept his voice steady. "You did the right thing." She looked at him. Really looked. "I didn't think I could leave," she said. "I thought I was stuck. Then I saw Eli bleeding, and I didn't think at all. I just ran." Caleb gave a slow nod. "Takes grit to leave." "Or desperation." "Both," he said. "And it matters." They stood that way a while, listening to the sound of the wind brushing the walls. Inside, the fire crackled. The baby sighed in her sleep. Eli was carving something near the hearth, and Lina hummed under her breath as she folded rags. Mara's hand slid from the chair to her side. Caleb noticed her swaying and stepped forward to steady her. "I'm all right," she said. "You're not steady yet." "I'm not broken either." He looked at her hand still hovering near hers. "Didn't say you were." She studied him, something unreadable in her gaze. Then she sat back down on the rocker and pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Why are you alone out here?" she asked. "Didn't plan it," he said. "Just turned out that way. You lose someone." He didn't answer right away. His eyes went to the fire. "My wife," he said finally. 8 years back. And a brother before that. "I'm sorry." "So was I." The wind pressed against the windows again, a soft and steady sound like breathing. Mara said, "I can work. Once I'm stronger, I'll cook. So, whatever's needed, you don't owe me anything." Her jaw tightened. "I don't mean it like that. I mean I want to." Caleb nodded slowly. "All right." Later that night, while the others slept, Caleb sat outside on the porch with a cup of coffee gone cold. He looked at the moon rising pale over the plains and thought about how silence used to be a comfort. Now it felt like a thing that could be shared. He wasn't sure what he was building here, but it was something. Spring came slow to the high country. The snow pulled back in muddy streaks, revealing a landscape bruised by cold. The trees held their leaves like secrets. Rivers ran high, fed by meltwater from the mountains. Everything smelled like damp earth and waking roots. Caleb planted early, hitching the plow with Eli by his side. The boy didn't speak much, but he watched closely, mimicked Caleb's every move. When the horse balked, Ellie stepped forward and calmed it without a word. The kid had something in him, a steadiness maybe that reminded Caleb of his own brother. Before everything broke, Mara grew stronger with the light. She moved slower than she used to, still wincing when she stood too long, but the color returned to her face. She sang sometimes now, soft and low, while washing clothes or tending to June. Not cheerful songs, nothing like that. Just tunes she carried from somewhere else. The kind that made silence feel less alone. Caleb began sleeping less in the rocker and more in the barn loft. It wasn't a conversation they had, just a shift. He gave the bed to her, and the kid set up a cot near the tack room for himself. But sometimes in the still of morning he'd come in to find Mara already awake, feeding the baby in the gray light, her eyes calm and far away. They didn't talk about what they were doing. Just lived the days as they came. Shared meals, shared tools, shared stories in pieces. One evening, while patching the roof, Caleb asked, "What do you want down the line?" Mara looked up from where she sat peeling potatoes. "You mean for me or the kids?" "You." She blinked, caught off guard. "I don't know. Never had the space to think like that." "You do now." She wiped her hands. "A place to stay. A garden. Maybe a few chickens. I don't need much. Just peace." "You could have that here." He hadn't meant to say it. It just came out. Mara studied him, not smiling, not frowning, just seeing him. "I know," she said. Later that night, Lena brought Caleb a drawing charcoal on the back of an old invoice. It was a crooked little house with smoke curling from the chimney. 5 stick figures stood out front. One of them held a baby. Caleb stared at it a long time. "You draw this?" Lena nodded, her thumb in her mouth. "Is that me?" he asked, pointing to the tallest figure. She grinned shyly. He pinned it to the wall with a bent nail and didn't say a word. But not everything softened with spring. One morning, Mara was out back hanging laundry when a rider appeared at the edge of the property. She saw him first, froze, eyes fixed on the dark shape approaching. Caleb came out with a sack of grain slung over his shoulder, caught her expression and dropped it without thinking. The man on horseback was tall and rangy, a battered hat low over his eyes. He didn't wave, just rode slow and steady toward the house. Caleb stepped in front of Mara. "You know him?" he asked. She didn't speak, but the fear on her face was answer enough. The rider stopped 10 yards out. "I'm looking for Mara Rose," he called. His voice was smooth like a salesman's. Not friendly, not angry, just sure of himself. Caleb didn't move. "She ain't here." The man tilted his head. "You're sure?" "She ain't here," Caleb repeated. The man looked past him, eyes landing on Mara. His smile never reached his eyes. "Well now," he said, "that ain't neighborly." I came a long way. Mara's voice came from behind Caleb, sharp and low. You need to leave Carter. Carter's gaze flicked back to her. You got my children, Mara. They're not yours, she said. He spat into the dirt. They came from my house. You made that house a prison. Caleb stepped forward. You heard her? Time to ride on. Carter looked him up and down, eyes cold. And are you some squatter she conned into playing daddy? Caleb didn't flinch. You need to turn around. Now? Carter's jaw worked. Then slowly he tipped his hat. I'll be back. Ain't over. He turned his horse and rode out, never looking back. Mara collapsed to her knees the second he was gone. Caleb knelt beside her, hands on her shoulders. He's not getting near them, he said. I swear it. Mara nodded, but her whole body trembled. He's not gonna give up. Neither am I. He helped her up, one hand steady at her back. Inside, the children sensed something had changed. Eli sat with his knife in hand. Ruthie wouldn't let go of Mara's dress. They all knew. The storm that spring had passed wasn't the last. Caleb built the fence higher the next day. Thick rails dug deep circled close around the cabin and the barn. It wouldn't stop a bullet, but it sent a message. He posted lookout wires with tin cans strung between trees, the kind that would rattle if anyone tried creeping in after dark. Eli helped string them, jaw-clenched, eyes older than they should have been. You scared Caleb? Asked him as they worked. The boy shook his head. Not if you're here. It hit Caleb in the chest, quick and hard. He said nothing, just nodded and handed over the next wire. Inside, Mara didn't speak much. She moved like a woman walking across thin ice. Careful, distant. Caleb watched her lose herself in the rhythm of chores. Folding, feeding, cleaning, wrapping, June with careful, practiced hands. But she hardly looked anyone in the eye. At night he heard her crying behind the bedroom door. Soft, contained, a sound made for surviving. He sat outside those nights with the rifle across his lap, eyes on the black line of trees. Carter didn't come back that week, or the next. But something had shifted. There was no going back to what they'd been before. A quiet truce had broken. What replaced it was sharper, heavier, more real. One afternoon, as rain ticked against the windows and the baby napped on Mara's chest, she said, He'll try something. I know. If he goes to the sheriff, says I took the kids, he'll have to find a lawman willing to drag a mother out of a cabin with newborns in her arms. He's charming when he wants to be, dangerous when he's not. Caleb watched her from across the room. You're not alone anymore. Mara looked up. That's what scares me. I can't outrun it this time. If I stay, I'm putting you in it. I already am. She stared at him. You don't have to be. I know, he said. But I want to be. Her eyes softened just a little. Why? He set the coffee tin down slow. Because the first time I saw you, you were half dead in the snow and you still had your arms around your kids. Because you never once asked for pity. Because you fight when you've got nothing left. Mara looked away, lips pressed tight. And maybe, he added, because I haven't felt like a man worth anything in a long time. Until you. The room went quiet, save the soft ticking of rain and the faint sound of Ruthie's humming from behind the curtain. Mara stood slowly, cradling June. She crossed the room without speaking and handed him the baby. Caleb blinked. I don't. Hold her, Mara said. He took the child awkwardly, unsure of how to angle his arms. But June nestled into his chest without complaint, a warm weight against his ribs. Her tiny breath rose and fell in sync with his own. Mara sat down across from him. I've only ever known men who took, she said. You don't? He looked down at the baby in his arms. I ain't sure what I am. You're steady, she said. That counts. A few days later, word came through Thomas Peterson quiet talk in town that Carter had filed a claim with the county court. Accused Mara of endangering the children. Claimed she left them without food, shelter, or a plan. Claimed she was sick in the head. He's laying the ground to take them, Caleb said flatly. Mary Peterson folded her hands tight. You'll need more than just truth on your side. You'll need to show you're better for them. Caleb looked at Mara. She was still as stone. They can't take them, she said. Not again. They won't, Caleb said. We'll fight. Right proper and loud if we have to. Later that evening, after the Petersons had left, Mara turned to Caleb at the sink, her voice barely a whisper. If I asked you to lie for me, to say we're something we're not, would you? He met her eyes. You think we're not? She didn't answer. I'll say whatever protects those kids, he said. And you. That night, as they sat together beside the fire, Mara laid her head on his shoulder. No kiss. No promises. Just warmth. Just wait. Caleb rested his cheek against her hair and closed his eyes. He didn't know what kind of man Carter was planning to bring to the courtroom, but he knew what kind of man he was going to be. The hearing was held in a borrowed church hall, all scrubbed pine and slanted light through colored glass. It smelled of dust and polish, and every step echoed too loud. There was no jury, just a county judge with a thin mustache and a ledger half filled with names that hadn't mattered until now. Caleb wore his cleanest shirt buttoned to the neck. Mara held June tight against her chest, her other arm around Ruthie. Lina clung to her skirt. Eli stood beside Caleb, tall and stiff, his jaw locked, like he was holding in something he couldn't name. Carter sat across the aisle, sharp as ever, in a fitted coat and slicked back hair. He smiled with his mouth, but not his eyes. When he saw Mara, he gave a little nod, like she was a dog who'd finally come back. She didn't look at him. The judge cleared his throat and asked for the facts. Carter spoke first, laying out a story so smooth it almost sounded true. Claimed Mara had run off without warning. Claimed he returned from town to find the wagon gone and the children missing. Said he'd feared for their safety. Said he was heartbroken, not angry. Just a man trying to reunite his family. He even teared up near the end. Folded his hands. Looked down like he was praying. Caleb stared at the floor, jaw clenched so hard it ached. He could feel Mara trembling beside him. Then the judge turned to her. Mara stood slow and sure. She spoke in a voice that cracked but didn't break. She told the truth. About the bruises no one had seen. About the night she'd stood between Carter and the children. About the broken dishes, the slammed doors, the names whispered in anger. About the silence she'd learned to live with, and the moment it snapped. I didn't run, she said. I escaped. Carter laughed, once sharp and bitter. You didn't look too miserable laying up with that man on the mountain. The judge raised a hand. That'll be enough. Mara's shoulders rose. She looked at Caleb, then just a glance, and stepped forward. I don't want his money. I don't want revenge. I just want my children safe. The judge called Caleb next. He hadn't spoken in a room like that in years. Not since burying his wife. His voice felt too loud, his words too plain. But he told them everything. How he found her. How he carried each child back through the snow. How Mara had come back from the edge with nothing but grit and instinct. How the children had begun to laugh again, to speak. How the baby had been born in the cabin in firelight, in pain and quiet joy. And when the judge asked about his role, Caleb spoke clear. We live together. We share the work. I help raise the children. I love them. All of them. And I'd marry her tomorrow if she asked. A hush settled over the room. Carter smirked. So that's it. You're claiming them now. Like Cattle. Caleb turned to him. No, I'm protecting them, like a man should done from the start. The judge called for a recess and stepped into the back with a clerk and the pastor who'd offered the space. The room stayed silent. Mara sat, eyes fixed on her hands. Caleb could hear her breathing. Then Eli moved, walked to the front, and without being asked said in a voice just loud enough to carry, "He hit my mama more than once. He hit me too, and I remember." The judge came back 15 minutes later and called them all to stand. His ruling was careful but not cold. Custody remained with Mara. Carter was denied visitation unless appealed and approved. The court recognized the risk, he said, and the strength required to break it. Carter didn't argue, just nodded once too tightly, then turned and left his boots echoing across the wooden floor. He never looked back. Outside, the sky was wide and clear. Dust blew down the main road and the wind smelled faintly of sage. Mara sat on the church steps, June asleep in her arms. Caleb stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets. "He'll come back someday," she said. "Maybe," Caleb answered. "But if he does, he won't find you alone." Mara looked up. "You meant it? What you said in there?" "I did." She studied his face like she was searching for something she didn't quite trust she had the right to hold. Then she said, "Ask me." He turned fully to her. "Mara," he said, his voice rough, "will you marry me?" Her answer was quiet, certain. "Yes." The wind kicked up around them, warm this time, carrying the scent of dust and grass and something blooming just out of sight. They married under the cottonwoods behind the cabin just as the first green leaves pushed from the branches. The creek ran fast with meltwater chattering over stone, and the sky stretched wide and pale above them as if watching. Caleb wore the same coat he'd owned for years. Mara braided her hair and wore her mother's old brooch pinned to her dress. Thomas and Mary Peterson came with their boys and 2 hens as a gift. The children ran barefoot through the grass, laughing like they'd forgotten how heavy the world could be. Eli stood beside Caleb, proud and still. Lena held June, her arms steady despite the weight. Ruthie picked wildflowers and stuffed them into Mara's hand just before the vows. There wasn't a preacher, just Mary reading from a leather-bound Bible and Caleb taking Mara's hand in both of his. "No rings," he said, "but I've got the rest." Mara smiled, eyes soft. "I've got everything I need." Afterward they sat under the trees, passing bread and coffee and smoked meat on tin plates. The sun dipped behind the hills and fireflies came early, blinking over the fields. Eli carved a new handle for Mara's kitchen knife. Lena gave Caleb another drawing, this one with 7 stick figures, not 6. She'd drawn a tiny cabin with smoke, a garden, a dog that didn't yet exist, and a horse that looked suspiciously like his sorrel. Inside the cabin, after the others had gone, Mara rocked June by the hearth, humming one of her quiet songs. Caleb packed away the last dishes, wiping crumbs from the table, watching her like a man watching home settle into place. "You tired?" he asked. "Not yet." He nodded, leaned against the doorframe. "You ever think you'd end up here?" "No," she said. "I didn't think I'd end up anywhere." He stepped closer, crouched beside her, one hand resting on June's back. "You did," he said. "You made it." She looked at him then, at the baby. "We did." Outside, the wind rustled the cottonwoods. The fence stood firm around the yard. The snow was long gone. The land at last had softened. There would be hard days still. Trouble would come in one form or another. That was just life out here. But it would come to a place built on something stronger than fear. It would come to a house with voices inside, with laughter, with roots. And when it came, they'd face it together. Mara reached out and took Caleb's hand. He didn't let go. If this story left a mark, subscribe and see how the next one deepens it.